Hello everyone, tonight we're going somewhere warm, bright, and just a little too perfect for its own good. A Christmas Eve so polished you could see your future anxieties reflected in the marble. I'm telling this in a low voice because it's late and because the truth always sounds clearer when the house is quiet. You'll smell cinnamon in the air. You'll hear crystal hum against crystal. And you might wonder, like I did, why even the laughter feels rehearsed. You may not survive an evening like this without a plan, or at least a good exit strategy, so consider this your seatbelt. I'll drive. You breathe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing the little constellation our stories make across the map. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a little gentle noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. The door opened on the second knock. Sloane's smile had the tensile strength of fishing wire, fine, almost invisible, and capable of slicing you open. "Margaret, you made it," she sang, stepping back so the chandelier could audition for a luxury calendar. Traffic. She said it like bad life choices. "I took the South Road," I said, holding up my apple pie as if it were diplomatic credentials. Julian's favorite since he was 7. "Adorable!" Her gaze skimmed the lattice crust, more appraisal than appreciation. "The kitchen staff can find a spot." Staff. The word tapped me on the shoulder and then pushed. I crossed the foyer into a living room curated to within an inch of its soul evergreen garlands braided with copper lights, a fire making careful magazine quality flames, pillows that looked sat on but had never met a human spine. Sloane's family clustered like a board meeting that had wandered into a Christmas carol, glasses of champagne talk pitched at a frequency that excludes mothers-in-law. Everyone Sloane Carol Julian's mother is here. Not Margaret. Not Grandma Maggie to Theo and Daisy. Merely a relational title like a warning label. Julian stood near the mantel, handsome in a way that was mostly relief, my boy, upright, breathing, remembering to smile. "Mom," he said, "I'm glad you're here. Come sit." Actually, Sloane slid in. I was hoping Margaret could help me in the kitchen. Holiday chaos. Her voice suggested she'd personally invented both holidays and chaos. Reader. I know the choreography. Age teaches you the tempo of rooms, the way roles are assigned without words. You might call it the senior advantage, the ability to map a situation while everyone else is admiring the wallpaper. Intellectual note of the evening perspective expands with years like a camera lens. Hindsight isn't 20/20, it's widescreen. I smiled and followed her because sometimes the shortest path through a minefield is a straight line. In the kitchen, Sloane's smile clocked out. "I need you to handle service," she said, checking a tablet as if my usefulness were a line item. My mother's arthritis is acting up. "Of course." I set the pie down, shoulders remembering weight they didn't owe anyone. For the next hour, I became a silent verb, carry, refill, retrieve. I ferried platters big enough to land aircraft on port wine that smelled like an apology I didn't owe, and learned the names of cheeses I would forget by New Year's. Each time I entered conversation, paused a tiny stage cue, then resumed, carefully stepping over me like I was an ottoman that wandered into the shot. "Margaret, more bread?" Sloane called, not looking away from her father. "Margaret, the kids' portions need cutting." Margaret, we're out of the Sauvignon. Every request was a paper cut. By dessert, I was confetti. Here is a quirky aside, because my brain insists on them under stress. I alphabetize my spices by mood. Fennel is hopeful, paprika is dramatic, oregano is practical. Tonight, I could have used a fistful of practical. When the coffee came, I chose the tray with the steady lip The one any reasonable person would trust with 8 cups and a reputation. My thumb-old companion, unreliable narrator, hesitated. A jitter, a tilt, a soft gasp from the table, and coffee arced like a dark ribbon across Sloane's dress. It wasn't a disaster, not by history book standards. But in this room, the stain spread like an accusation. "I'm so sorry," I said, napkin already working. Heat climbed my face faster than the coffee soaked the linen. I caught Julian's eyes, concern, then calculation, then something like a held breath. Sloane rose like slow weather. "Do you have any idea what this cost?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Of course you don't." Her smile cut. "You probably shop sales." "Accidents happen," I said softly. "Do they?" She glanced at her family as if confirming the world was still watching. "Because with you, everything is an accident." Laughter, thin eager, skimmed the table's edge, died quickly. Even her mother studied her glass like it might offer counsel. To be precise, as any peer-reviewed journal would insist, this is the moment when hypothesis meets data. Cruelty seeks an audience. Kindness works fine without one. I could have left. Gather dignity, bow out, become a parable on the drive home. But age has also taught me the power of the pause when you let silence settle. Truth steps forward to fill it. So I set the napkin down. "I think no," Sloane said, stepping closer. The room telescoped her perfume, a winter pear with a legal degree. Her hand lifted. I saw the intent before the motion, which is the saddest superpower I've earned, recognizing hurt as it's born. A dry, bright sound cracked the room. My cheek flared. "I won't dramatize it." PG-13, we promised. It stung. It stunned. It rearranged everyone's posture, especially their beliefs. A chair scraped. Julian stood his napkin dropping like a little white flag. For a heartbeat, I thought I heard my boy at 6 saying, "Don't talk to my mom like that." What came out was older and colder. He looked at Sloane the way attorneys look at clauses. "You just slapped," he said, "the woman who owns this house." The air changed temperature. Someone's fork clinked loud as a confession. A cousin laughed one short bark and apologized to the table for his nerves. Joke one of the night courtesy of panic. Sloane blinked. What? Julian didn't blink. The house, the cars, the company that buys your dresses, all of it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Calm is scarier than volume. Second light joke to keep us breathing. If shock burned calories, that room would have met its New Year's resolutions before dessert. I put my fingertips to my cheek, not in theatrical injury, but in mild curiosity, how heat moves, how skin remembers. Strange what you study when a room is collapsing. A lifetime of meetings, bake sales, funerals, and birthdays had trained me to catalog the human weather. Sloane's father cleared his throat in C major. Perhaps, I said gently, "We should all sit." My voice surprised me. Cool, soft, the tone you use with bees and bankers. Age gives you range. You can hum and still be heard. I could see the questions unspooling around the table like ribbon. What does she own? Since when? Why didn't we know? Here's joke 3, because I promised if I had $1 for every time someone underestimated me, well, I do, and that's the point. Do not mistake me. I take no pleasure in scenes. I prefer tidy kitchens and people who say please. But some nights are pivots, and you either turn or you topple. My hand lowered. My heart steadied. I caught Julian's eye and nodded once, the smallest treaty. We would explain just enough, not more. And later, when the lights were off and the dishwasher hummed like a cheap ocean, I'd let grief have its say. For now, I stood in a room that finally saw me. The garland stopped smirking. The fire sighed, Even the chandelier toned down its resume. Sloan, I said we'll speak in a minute. For now, go change your dress. I'll have the laundry room send the tablecloth out in the morning. She didn't move. Pride is a poor dance partner. It steps on your feet and insists the music is wrong. But she went eventually, a slow retreat down the hallway that seemed longer than it had an hour ago. Doors closed. The room exhaled and the night resumed, only now the script belonged to me. Sloan reappeared 20 minutes later, her dress changed, but her eyes still sharp as glass edges. The table had cooled into the kind of silence where even the cutlery hesitates. Julian was standing by the sideboard now, one hand on a leather folder I hadn't seen before, the other wrapped around a glass of water like it was anchoring him. Sit, he told her. No sharpness, no rise in tone, just the kind of simple, declarative order that makes the floorboards listen. She glanced at me, then back at him. Are we really doing this now in front of everyone? He interrupted. They've seen enough already. Might as well hear the rest. There's a particular dignity that comes with age, not the brittle, chin-high kind, but the soft-spoken confidence of someone who's already outlived multiple versions of herself. My father used to call it the front porch advantage, the ability to sit back and watch the storms roll in without feeling the need to run inside. I took a sip of water, settled my shoulders, and let the storm approach. Julian opened the folder and began laying out documents in an orderly fan property, deeds, incorporation papers, stock certificates. These, he said, are all in my mother's name. Sloane's laugh was half breath, half disbelief. You're bluffing. No, I said quietly, sliding one of the deeds closer to her. That's the title for this house. Bought it 5 years ago, kept it in my portfolio, let you live here, rent-free, when you married my son. Her eyes darted to the legal stamp, then back to me. But Julian, with money she lent me, Julian said. Money from her businesses, her investments, her empire, basically. I almost smiled. Empire was too grand a word, but it wasn't entirely inaccurate. When my husband died, everyone assumed I was a widow with a modest life insurance policy. That assumption had been my most profitable investment. While they offered condolences, I quietly bought small apartment buildings in neighborhoods no one believed in. Acquired commercial properties when the market dipped, reinvested dividends into ventures that made accountants raise their eyebrows in admiration. Here's a quirky fact I've always loved in chess. The queen is the most powerful piece, not because she starts with that power, but because she gains it through flexibility. Adapt or lose, it's as simple as that. Sloan was still staring at the papers, like they might rearrange themselves into a friendlier truth. This doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you tell me? Because I said I needed to know who you were without the incentive of my money. Her lips parted in protest, but Julian cut in again. She's been watching you, Sloan. 3 years of watching how you treat her when you thought she had nothing to give you. Every little slight, every public embarrassment documented. That word landed like a stone. Her shoulders stiffened. Documented. I reached into the folder and pulled out a small digital recorder, its black surface catching the light. Thanksgiving. 2 years ago, I said. When you thought I was napping in the guest room, you and your sister discussed ways to make me feel unwelcome. You called me I didn't finish. I didn't need to. Julian pressed play. Her voice poured into the room, tinny but unmistakable. If that old bat stays much longer, I'm going to lose it. She acts like she belongs here. Byron keeps making excuses for her, but I'm done. The academic in me. Yes, there's one in all of us, couldn't help noting how tone shifts when people speak without their intended audience present. Here, stripped of politeness, her words were efficient, almost mechanical in their contempt. By the time the clip ended, the room had grown so still, you could hear the fireplace settling. Sloane's face had drained of color, her fingers curling against the edge of the table. That was out of context, she tried. Julian shook his head slowly. It was exactly the context. I leaned forward, not raising my voice, but letting each word land like a pebble in still water. I could have ended this arrangement at any point. One call and you'd be packing your things, but I wanted to see if you could recognize kindness without strings. You didn't. Her gaze flicked from me to the stack of papers, to Julian's steady expression, back to me. So, what now? That I said depends on what you're willing to do to make it right. If you've lived long enough, you learn that some turning points arrive without warning. Others you see coming from a mile away, like a slow freight train across a flat plain. This one had been whistling in the distance for 3 Christmases. Now it was here in my dining room, and it wasn't stopping. Julian reached into the folder again and pulled out 2 more documents, placing them side by side. "These are your options," he said simply. The first was a behavior contract, strict, humiliating if she chose to see it that way, transformative if she didn't. The second was a divorce settlement with a lump sum that wouldn't cover half a year of her current spending. Sloane stared at them both, her knuckles whitening. "This is insane." "This is reality," I said. And for the first time all night, she didn't have an immediate comeback. Sloane's eyes darted between the 2 papers as if one might magically vanish and solve her problem. The gold from the chandelier caught in her hair, but there was nothing warm about the light on her face. "You can't expect me to sign this," she said, tapping the behavior contract with a fingernail that looked sharp enough to scratch through drywall. "I don't expect," I replied. "I offer. There's a difference." She laughed once, short, brittle. "And if I refuse, then you'll be signing the other one," Julian said. He was still calm, still steady, like a lawyer who's rehearsed his closing statement in front of a mirror for weeks. "And you'll be moving out within 48 hours. The old part of me, the mother, the hostess, the woman who smoothed over conflicts before they stained, wanted to say, "Let's all sleep on it." But another part, the one forged from 1,000 small humiliations, knew that delay is where dignity goes to die. "You have until midnight," I told her. "That's generous." She snorted like we'd just offered her the worst Groupon deal in history. "I need to call my mother." "Go ahead," Julian said. "But you should know she's already aware of the situation. We sent her the documents and recordings last week." The way Sloane's face tightened told me she'd just remembered her mother's unfiltered honesty. That conversation wouldn't go her way. While she stepped into the hallway, the rest of the table stayed quiet. Plates half full, coffee cooling, the kind of stillness you get in museums, where even footsteps feel like they should whisper. Here's an odd little fact for you. Penguins can recognize their mate's call among thousands, even in the chaos of a breeding colony. People aren't so different. In a noisy room, you can always pick out the tone of someone you trust, or someone you don't. We could hear Sloane's voice in the hallway, low, clipped with a rising edge that suggested her mother wasn't playing along with the rescue fantasy. "She's burning through her lifelines," Julian murmured. "Good," I said. "It's time she realizes she's on her own." I thought of something my old friend Marianne once said over coffee. Some people don't change until there's nowhere else to stand. It wasn't profound enough for a dissertation, but it stuck. Sloane returned with the kind of stiff posture that says that did not go well. She avoided everyone's eyes as she sat. She told me I made my bed and I should lie in it. "Smart woman," I said. "I need to call Sarah," she muttered. "By all means," Julian said, gesturing toward the hallway again. That call was shorter. When she came back, her face had shifted from indignation to something closer to panic. "She's known for 2 years," Sloane admitted. "She almost warned you, but she hoped I'd come to my senses." Her voice caught on the words. "Seems everyone's been waiting on you," I said evenly. She sat heavily, the defiance leaking out of her like air from a slow puncture. "If I sign this," she nudged the contract, "you'll really hold me to it?" "Yes," I said. "That's humiliating." "Not as humiliating as making your husband's mother eat alone in the kitchen while your guests laughed at the table," I replied. Julian leaned forward. Read the terms out loud. Her eyes flashed. Seriously. Seriously. She started reading. "Respect and courtesy at all times. Hosting and serving monthly family dinners. all expenses reviewed by me. Written apologies to every person who'd witnessed her disrespect. And the final clause, the contract could be terminated at my discretion, cutting off all financial support and housing immediately. When she finished, she looked like someone who just read their own obituary. You want me to grovel? I want you to be decent, I said. Groveling's optional. Her gaze slid to the divorce settlement. $50,000. That's nothing. It's more than you'd get under the prenup you signed, Julian said. Read it again if you've forgotten. Sloane's eyes narrowed. You tricked me into signing that before we were married. Julian's tone stayed even. You signed it because you assumed I had less than I do. That's not trickery, that's your own carelessness. It landed. She sat back, folding her arms, scanning the table like it might provide a loophole. But there were none left. The clock in the dining room ticked toward 10 every second, a reminder that her window was closing. I let the silence grow, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Sometimes the quiet shows you who you are. By 10:15, the tension in the dining room was as thick as the glaze on my apple pie, still untouched, by the way. Sloane's hands were restless, folding and unfolding her napkin into increasingly tragic origami. Julian had moved to the window, watching the frost creep along the glass, letting her sit with the weight of her choices. I'd once read in a psychology journal that people make their clearest decisions when they feel the consequences pressing on them in real time. Remove the pressure, and the mind wanders toward fantasy. Tonight, there would be no such escape route. She reached for her water, then set it back down untouched. You really could just throw me out. I could have, I said 3 years ago. And you didn't because I wanted to believe you could change without being forced. That seemed to land somewhere between her ribs. She shifted in her chair, then gave a humorless laugh. Guess I didn't pass the test. It wasn't a test, Julian said, still looking out the window. It was life. You just failed it in spectacular fashion. Sloane's jaw tightened. You've been waiting for this moment, both of you. Yes, I said without hesitation. But not because we wanted to humiliate you. Because we wanted to reclaim our peace. Here's your quirky aside for the evening. The average human blinks around 15 times per minute, but under stress, that rate drops dramatically. Watching Sloane barely blink was like watching someone try to stare down the sun. She glanced at the clock. I have almost 2 hours. I could, find someone who'd tell me not to sign this. Try, I said. But remember, your parents won't help. Your sister won't help, and most of your friends like the lifestyle more than they like you. Without the lifestyle, I let the thought trail off. Julian finally turned from the window, his hands clasped behind his back like a man addressing a jury. Let's be clear, either you sign the contract and live under it, or you sign the divorce and walk away. There's no third option. I need to think. Think here, I said, in the open, with the clock ticking. The room settled into a stillness that was almost comfortable for me, though I could see it was suffocating for her. It reminded me of my late husband's chess games, how he'd sit motionless, forcing his opponent to waste mental energy while he simply waited. At 10:30, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then went pale. It's Jennifer. She says she heard I'm having marital difficulties. Wants to know if I need a place to stay. That was quick, Julian murmured. Word travels, I said, especially when people are watching to see if a queen falls off her board. She glared at me. You enjoy this, don't you? No, I said honestly, but I do enjoy honesty. And tonight we're swimming in it for the first time in years. There's a senior truth for you. Honesty feels dangerous to the dishonest, but freeing to the rest of us. Sloane stared down at the 2 papers again. Her reflection doubled in the polished wood of the table. If I sign this, will the kids see? They'll see you being accountable, Julian said. They'll see you treating their grandmother with respect. They'll see you working to repair damage instead of pretending it doesn't exist. That's not the example I wanted to set. Maybe it's the one they need, I said. Her lips pressed into a line. The clock ticked louder, and somewhere in the house, The heating system clicked on, sending a low hum through the vents. Even the house seemed to be leaning in, waiting to see which way she'd break. At 10:45, she pushed her chair back abruptly and stood. "I need air." "Stay on the deck," Julian said. "Midnight deadline." She didn't answer, just stepped out into the cold, her breath blooming in the dark. Through the glass, I watched her pace, phone in hand, trying calls that all seemed to end too quickly. Julian came back to the table and sat beside me. "She's not going to find anyone to save her." "No," I said, folding my hands, "but maybe she'll find herself." We both knew that was the less likely outcome. By 11 o'clock, Sloane returned from the deck, her hair wind-blown cheeks flushed from the cold, or maybe from the string of conversations that hadn't gone her way. She looked older, like the hours since dessert had been years instead. She sank into her chair without ceremony. "Nobody's coming," she said flatly. "That's what happens," I said, "when you've spent your social capital without making deposits." Julian raised an eyebrow at me, half amused, half warning. But it was true. You can't cash in kindness you never gave. "I called my lawyer," Sloane added, eyes fixed on the table. "He says the prenup is ironclad. I'd be lucky to get the $50,000. Julian gave a slow nod. "That's correct." Sloane exhaled sharply. "So it's either sign this or walk away with nothing." "Not nothing," I corrected. "You'll still have your dignity if you choose the divorce. If you stay, you'll be earning it back in installments." She gave a humorless laugh. "Dignity. After signing a contract like this, dignity doesn't come from avoiding consequences," I said. "It comes from how you handle them." Here's a small academic truth in behavioral economics. People are more likely to take a guaranteed smaller loss than risk a larger one, even if the gamble could pay off. Tonight, Sloane's gamble was her pride, and the table was stacked against her. She flipped the contract toward her and stared at the first clause. "Treat Margaret with respect and courtesy at all times." She looked up at me. "Define respect." "Simple," I said. "Speak to me as if you're speaking to someone whose opinion could change your life, which, as it happens, is accurate." Julian fought a smirk. "Keep going. Attend monthly family dinners, personally prepare and serve the meal." Her jaw tightened. "That's just to humiliate me." "No," I said. "It's to teach you service without resentment. You'd be amazed how humility grows in a kitchen." She read the rest aloud, expense reviews, written apologies, and the termination clause that left her entirely at my discretion. Each word seemed to take something from her, though whether it was ego or stubbornness, I couldn't yet tell. When she finished, she looked between us. "And if I mess up once, we discuss it," I said. "If you mess up repeatedly, we end it." Sloane turned to the divorce papers. $50,000, 6 months with the smaller car, shared custody of the kids. She tapped the paper. "No spousal support. None," Julian confirmed. "Per the prenup, misconduct voids any claim." Her laugh this time had a jagged edge. "I really thought I was marrying into stability." "You were," I said. "But stability doesn't mean indulgence." She leaned back, studying me. "So what's the end game here? You want me groveling for the rest of my life?" "I want a family that doesn't feel like a chess match," I said. "And right now, you're the one moving pieces instead of people." Her mouth opened to fire back, but she shut it. For the first time tonight, I saw something in her expression that wasn't anger, it was calculation giving way to recognition. At 11:30, she reached for the pen, then set it down again. "If I sign, how will I know you won't use this to control me forever?" "You won't," I said plainly. "But here's the thing. I've always had the power to control you. You just didn't realize it. The difference now is you'll know the boundaries." That seemed to rattle her more than anything else. She looked at Julian, then back at me. "And if I take the divorce, then you leave tonight with what's yours," Julian said, "and you rebuild from there." Silence settled again, but it wasn't the frozen, brittle kind from earlier. This was the slow, heavy quiet of decision-making, the kind you feel in your chest. At 11:45, she stood and began pacing. "I can't believe I'm even considering this." "You can," I said softly, "because you know the alternative isn't any better." Her footsteps slowed. The clock ticked louder. She stared at the contract one last time, lips pressed together, the pen lying in wait beside it. At 11:55, Sloane finally stopped pacing. She stood at the head of the table, shoulders, squared hands braced against the wood like she was trying to absorb its stability. "I'm choosing to stay," she said, voice low, but firm enough to carry. "I'll sign the contract." She picked up the pen, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might make a performance of it, some sarcastic flourish to save face. But her hand trembled as she wrote her name, the ink skipping slightly over the grain. When she finished, she set the pen down without looking at me. "This doesn't mean I forgive you," I said quietly. "Forgiveness will take time, and you'll have to earn it." She gave a single nod, eyes still on the contract. "Your first official act under this agreement," I continued, "is to clean up the coffee you spilled earlier. Tomorrow you'll call each person who was here tonight and apologize for the scene you created." I could almost see the resistance flare and die in her expression. "Understood. Here's an odd little fact for you. When astronauts return from space, they have to relearn how to walk on Earth's gravity. It's a slow, sometimes awkward process." Watching Sloane move from the table to the dining room sideboard reminded me of that each step an adjustment to a new atmosphere she didn't quite understand yet. She returned with a rag and a bowl of soapy water, methodically wiping away the coffee stains. The room was quiet except for the soft swish of fabric against linen. Julian leaned toward me. "You think she means it?" "I think she means it enough to start," I said. "The rest we'll see." When she was done, she gathered the rag and bowl, then paused in the doorway. "I'll start making the call list tonight," she said. "That would be wise," I replied. By midnight, the guests were gone, the children tucked into bed, and the house had shifted into that post-storm calm, still faintly charged but breathable. I sat in the living room, the contract resting on the coffee table, my reading glasses beside it. Julian joined me, loosening his tie. "Part of me feels relieved," he said. "Part of me feels, I don't know, unsettled." "That's normal," I told him. Tonight wasn't about winning. It was about resetting. He nodded slowly, then glanced toward the hallway where Sloane had disappeared. "She's not the only one who'll have to adjust." No, I agreed. We all will. From the kitchen came the faint clink of dishes being stacked, a sound so mundane it was almost jarring after the evening we'd had. And yet it felt like the right note to end the night on. As I got up to head for bed, I passed the dining table and noticed a single folded napkin left behind. Inside, in Sloane's handwriting, was one line: "I know I've burned every bridge. I'll try to build a new one." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is all you can ask for. The first month under the contract was like living with a ghost who still paid the electric bill. Sloane moved through the house quietly, completing each requirement with the efficiency of someone checking off court-ordered community service. The monthly family dinner was served on time, each dish plated perfectly, but her smile was the kind you paste on for photographs you don't want to take. I let it be. You don't force sincerity. You leave space for it to arrive. Still, I noted every flicker, every sidelong glance that lingered a fraction too long. Every sigh when she thought no one was listening. Julian was more impatient. "She's just performing," he muttered one night while drying dishes. "This isn't change, it's damage control." Maybe I said, "But even rehearsals teach you the steps." Here's your intellectual tidbit for the evening. In neuroscience, they call it experience-dependent plasticity. The brain physically changes with repeated behavior, even if the behavior starts out forced. It was in the third month that something shifted. Tommy, my grandson, was riding his bike in the driveway when he took a sharp turn and went down hard, scraping his knee. I was in the living room halfway through knitting a scarf I'd been pretending to work on for weeks when I heard his cry. Before I could stand, Sloane was already outside, crouched beside him. She carried him in voice soft but urgent. "I think he might need stitches," she told me. And here was the change her eyes weren't calculating. They were asking for help. We worked together at the kitchen counter, cleaning the wound, bandaging it, keeping Tommy distracted with stories about how scars make you look adventurous. When he was settled with a popsicle, Sloane leaned against the counter. "Thanks," she said quietly. It was the first time she'd thanked me for anything in years. From then on, I noticed small changes. She started making coffee in the mornings before I came downstairs without being asked. She remembered I preferred my toast lightly browned and would slide a plate my way without a word. The apology letters were the hardest for her. The contract required her to write to everyone who'd witnessed her worst behavior, and some of the replies she received were blunt. One old friend of mine wrote, "You made me question why Julian married you. Don't make me regret accepting this apology." Sloane read that one twice before folding it back into the envelope and slipping it into a drawer. Quirky aside, magpies are known to collect shiny objects, not for their use, but because they seem drawn to things that reflect light. People aren't much different, Sloane began, gravitating toward moments that reflected well on her, however small. Helping with the kids' homework. Bringing me tea on rainy afternoons. She wasn't perfect, but the jagged edges were dulling. One Saturday, I found her in the garden with Daisy, showing her how to plant marigolds. Dirt streaked her cheek, her hair had escaped its perfect styling, and she was laughing, really laughing. I stood at the kitchen window watching them and thought, this is what could have been all along. When Julian came up behind me, coffee in hand, he said, "She's different now." "Really different?" I asked. He nodded. "I think so. She's not just playing a part anymore." I wasn't ready to declare victory, but I had to admit the house felt lighter. By month 4, the tension in the house had softened into something almost ordinary. Not warm, not yet, but ordinary has its own kind of peace. Sloane no longer moved like someone walking on a frozen lake. She still kept her tone careful around me, but there were fewer pauses before she spoke, fewer glances toward Julian to check if she'd crossed the line. One evening, while I was reading in the living room, she came in carrying a tray, 2 mugs of chamomile tea, steam curling into the lamplight. "Thought you might like this," she said, setting it down on the coffee table. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Here's an odd fact I once read in a medical journal. Chamomile can lower cortisol levels, which means it's not just good for sleep, it's good for cooling tempers. Maybe she knew that. Maybe it was coincidence. Either way, we sipped in companionable silence. Her monthly dinners had taken on a new tone, too. The food was still beautifully presented, but now she stayed at the table instead of retreating to the kitchen after serving. She'd asked Daisy about school, teased Julian about his cooking attempts, and once asked me for my lemon tart recipe. I gave it to her without fanfare, but I noticed she wrote every step in careful looping handwriting. Julian, ever the cautious observer, asked me later, "Do you trust her yet?" "I trust that she's learning," I said. "That's enough for now." The real turning point came in late spring. We were hosting an informal barbecue. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors, my oldest friend Marianne, and the kids' friends from school. At one point, Marianne leaned over to me and said, "You know, I've never seen her like this. She's relaxed." I followed her gaze. Sloane was at the grill with Julian, hair pulled back, laughing at something he said. No audience, no posturing, just present. It struck me then people don't always change because they see the light. Sometimes they change because they finally feel safe enough to. Quirky aside, garden snails can find their way home from up to 20 feet away. I've always thought people are like that too. We find our way back to who we could have been if someone leaves the path open. That night, after everyone left, Sloane stayed behind in the kitchen, helping me with the last of the dishes. "I know I haven't said this," she began, "but I'm trying. Not because of the contract, well, not just because of it, but because I like this better. Being part of things." I didn't give her a speech or a pat on the back. I just said, "Keep going." And for once, she didn't bristle at advice. She just nodded, rolled up her sleeves, and reached for another plate. The clock had passed midnight by the time the kitchen was clean. We both lingered a moment, leaning against the counter, tired but oddly comfortable in the same space. It wasn't friendship yet, but it wasn't war anymore either. By the 6th month, the contract had become less of a leash and more of a set of quiet guardrails. Sloane still kept to the terms, but it no longer felt like she was counting the days until she could escape them. One rainy afternoon, I found her in the kitchen with Daisy rolling out pie dough. The counter was dusted in flour like fresh snow, and Daisy was giggling at the way Sloane kept accidentally sprinkling extra on her nose. I stood in the doorway for a moment before Sloane noticed me. "We're making your apple pie," she said. Figured I should learn it from the source. I joined them at the counter, showing Daisy how to crimp the edges just so. For the first time in years, the kitchen felt like a shared space rather than contested territory. Here's your intellectual nugget for tonight in sociology. There's the concept of restorative practices where relationships are mended, not through punishment, but through intentional acts of cooperation. That afternoon felt like one of those acts. The change wasn't just at home. At a neighborhood potluck, I overheard her telling someone Margaret makes the best lemon tart. I'm still trying to get mine to taste like hers. There was no edge in her voice, no undercurrent of competition, just a simple compliment. The quirky aside, I've always believed compliments are like paper airplanes. You never quite know where they'll land. But if you send enough of them out, some will circle back. Julian noticed it too. "She's different," he said one night as we sat on the porch. "I don't feel like I'm bracing for impact every time we have people over." "She's learning," I said. That's what I wanted from the start. Still, I kept the contract in my desk drawer, not because I planned to use it, but because a reminder can be a powerful thing. One evening after dinner, Sloane lingered at the table as the kids ran off to play. "Do you think we'll ever get past it?" she asked. "Past what?" I replied. "All of it. The contract, the fights, Christmas Eve." I studied her for a long moment. "I think we'll get past it when we've built enough new memories to make the old ones fade." She nodded, looking almost relieved. "Then I guess we better start making them." It wasn't a promise, not yet. But it was intent, and sometimes intent is the first brick in the bridge back. Summer brought a rhythm to the house that felt almost natural. The kids spent more time outdoors. Julian worked from home on Fridays, and Sloane and I shared the kitchen without needing to choreograph our movements. There were still moments of hesitation, times when she'd glance at me before speaking, or when I'd instinctively brace for a sharp comment that never came, but they were fewer now. One Saturday morning, I found her in the garden pulling weeds from the herb bed. "I thought you hated dirt under your nails," I teased. She smirked. "Turns out it's not that bad when you're doing it for something you care about." We worked side by side, the sun warm on our backs. She asked me about basil care. I asked her about the kids' new swimming lessons. It was easy, uncomplicated. Here's your intellectual note for the evening. In behavioral psychology, there's the mere exposure effect. The more time you spend around someone in a neutral or positive context, the more you tend to like them. That morning, I felt the truth of it. Later that week, Julian took the kids to a movie, leaving the house unusually quiet. Sloane appeared in the living room doorway holding a small envelope. I wrote something she said, handing it to me. Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick paper. "Margaret, I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know I'm not just following rules anymore. I'm trying to be the kind of person you'd want in your family, even if there were no contract. Thank you for giving me the chance to change." I folded it carefully and placed it in my jewelry box next to the contract. "Thank you," I said simply. The quirky aside, I once read that elephants will return to the bones of their dead years later, touching them gently with their trunks. Maybe that's what we were doing, returning to what was broken, not to mourn it, but to acknowledge it before moving forward. That evening during dinner, my grandson looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Grandma, you smile more now," he said, and Mama doesn't look mad anymore when she talks to you. Out of the mouths of children. I glanced at Sloane, who smiled faintly, and for the first time it didn't feel like a performance. After the dishes were done, and the house settled into its nighttime quiet, I found a second note slipped under my door. Thank you for not giving up on me. I slipped it into the jewelry box with the first. Not because I needed the reminder of her gratitude, but because I wanted proof for myself that change is possible, even when it starts from a place you never wanted to stand. And as I turned off the light, I thought about the marigolds blooming in the garden, planted by hands that had once struck me in anger, now tending to the roots we were growing together. Over the course of 10 months, a single Christmas Eve confrontation transformed the entire dynamic of my family. It began with Sloane's public slap, an act born of years of quiet cruelty and the revelation that I was not the powerless mother-in-law she imagined, but the owner of the home cars and company that underpinned her life. Faced with a choice between a humiliating behavior contract or a divorce settlement that offered her little, she chose the contract more out of necessity than remorse. The first months were mechanical. She followed the terms like someone serving a sentence. But small moments began to shift her, helping my injured grandson, writing difficult apology letters, sharing quiet cups of tea. The monthly family dinners stopped feeling like obligations and began to look like opportunities. She learned recipes, joined in conversations, and started offering help without being asked. 6 months in the tension had eased. She engaged more naturally with me and the children, and even neighbors noticed the change. Her compliments became genuine, her presence more relaxed. There were still guarded moments, but they were outweighed by signs of intent to rebuild. By the end of summer, the contract felt less like control and more like structure. She began gardening, sought my advice, and gave me handwritten letters expressing a desire to be a better person, one I'd want in my family, even without obligation. The house had found its rhythm again. Change didn't come from a single epiphany. It came from a series of small, consistent acts that rewrote how we treated each other. What began as an ultimatum ended as a cautious but genuine peace proof that, given the right boundaries and enough time, even the most fractured relationships can grow something new.